Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie, and joining me as always is the lovely Nora St. John. How you doing, Nora?
Very well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited about this week's topic because you and I have been... the best way I can describe this is if you've ever watched any of the news or sports programs that are on television today, they're all arguing in agreement. You know, they're trying to yell at the top of their lungs so that they're heard, but they're all yelling in agreement. And I think you and I have sort of been doing that for a long time on this topic. And the topic is open versus closed chain and looking at the whole kinetic chain in general. And just, you know, what is open, what is closed? Is it what it was designed to be, what it was first described as back in 1958 or 1953 when it was first written about. So we're going to dive into that today and see where this goes.
Awesome. This is one of those things where when I first heard this concept, which was a long time ago, because there's a lot of things that you read that say, well, this is much more effective in a closed chain environment. This particular methodology uses an open chain environment, right? There's all kinds of things that get said that way. And I'm like, open chain, closed chain. And they're typically defined. So starting out with basic definition, closed chain is typically defined as a situation where your hands or your feet are in full contact with a surface. Like you're standing, right? Or you're in a plank. And a couple of things they say about closed chain, for example, is a closed chain creates more distal control. So in other words, the hands or the feet are a lot of what are controlling the rest of the body. The proprioception from that is doing that. And they're more stable generally.
Well, the stability is coming from an outside force.
Right, like the floor.
Like the floor
or
a wall or whatever you're connected to. Exactly. Right.
And then open chain is basically where your hands or your feet are not in contact with something. So you're more, flowing through the air. Now, I think both of us have talked about this. The reason this really didn't work very well for me was because growing up in the Pilates environment, it's like, well, when you have your feet on the foot bar, your whole foot isn't on the foot bar.
Right.
Is that closed chain? What if you have your feet in the straps? There's some contact at the foot, but it's not a solid surface. What if you have, your hands aren't on the floor? What if your hands are on dumbbells, right? What if your hands are in the straps? And all of those circumstances are not really covered by open and closed chain as they're traditionally defined, at least as I've heard them traditionally defined.
And even in fitness, if you think about it, how I always heard it was, well, a push-up is closed chain. So if you want to train your chest in a closed chain environment, you want to do a push-up. And then barbell bench press is also closed chain, but it's closed chain because you're attached to a bar, so you don't have lateral forces, but you still have, flexion and extension in the shoulder that you still have to control. And then you get an even more open chain once you get to dumbbells. Dumbbells are the most open chain. And a machine is very closed chain. And breaking it down that way, I thought, well, yes and no. Because each one has a different sense of stability and where the stability is coming from.
Right.
And I think you said it best. If stability is coming distally from whatever surface you're attached to, then that would make it a lot more closed chain, like when we're standing or leaning against a wall. We're not going to move that wall. The wall is stabilizing my hands.
Right.
It's stabilizing my feet.
So one of the things that you said earlier, because we were talking a little bit before this, and I want to just bring it up, I think it was really important, is both of us have done some reading on this, right? Looked through the famous internet and various books that we've had and looking at how they talk about closed chain and open chain. And honestly, it is extremely unsophisticated and not very helpful. Has that been your experience as well?
Very much so. The main thing that I noticed was almost every study, and I looked at, 30, 40 studies. Most of them are all about the ACL, and how to train the ACL, because that's the one where in fitness land, especially in rehabilitation, we talk about, okay, after an ACL, we don't want any open chain terminal knee extension. That's a no-no.
Right.
So don't go on a leg extension machine, because that puts you into a lot of shear force within the knee. But closed chain is where you want to be. And in reading a lot more of the latest data, it's not as clear cut as you would think when it comes to that, because there have been a couple studies that showed, well, there's absolutely value to that. It's safer to stay closed chain. It's a safer environment. But a lot of the stuff that I was reading wasn't as clear cut as open chain is going to ruin the graft. It's going to put you in such severe state that, never, ever, ever should you ever do an open chain. Because let's face it, if I have a client with their leg over a foam roller or a bolster with a 1 pound weight on their leg doing a terminal knee extension, which is just the end range or short arc quad, the end range extension with that little bit of weight, is that going to ruin a graft? No, it's so minor in weight. So it's one of those things that I think there's a lot of fear mongering that happens when people, dive into this. They're like, oh, no, never, never, never. And it's like, look, never say never. Keep them as safe as you can, obviously. But the more data that comes out, the more I realize that there's no real clear cut, answer to that question.
Right. So again, this is used in a clinical context in that situation. And then from a training context, more of a performance-oriented context or just, strength and coordination context, then it gets complicated, much more complicated for me almost immediately.
Yep.
And again, I like to focus for me on the neurological component. Like, what is that body position, or what are those contact points, whatever they are? What feedback are they giving to the body? Like, what are they encouraging or inspiring the body to do? And so when I think about standing up and doing a squat, right? My feet are on the floor. I'm doing a squat. I'm bending my knees full, like closed chain. Yes, yes, yes. I think about a lot of that feedback is coming from the floor.
Yep.
Right? My feet are on the floor. I have I play with equal weight on the front and the back of my foot, whatever I'm working on in terms of balancing that weight. And then I line my feet up against that stable surface. On the other hand, if I am, let's say, on a reformer, because again, talking from the Pilates lens, if I'm on a reformer and I have my feet in the straps.
Yep.
Right. So the straps are on the arch of my foot, more or less, right? So I'm on the arch of the foot and I'm pushing in and out. So same movement as a squat. But now what I'm attached to is, number one, only providing proprioception in a certain area.
Yep.
In this case, just around the arch. I'm not getting proprioception from the metatarsals, from the toes, from the heel, which is really where you're generally weight bear, right? Your arch doesn't bear or doesn't touch the ground. And that those straps are not predictable.
No.
Necessarily. Right? They're a mobile surface. Like, I can go narrower, I can go wider, I can go internally rotated. Like, it isn't going to give me that signal of this is where your leg needs to be, like the floor will.
Yep. Yeah, in that sense, I completely agree. To me, as soon as you go into straps, I'm sorry, that makes it open chain in my mind, because suddenly the stability has to change 100%. And I even get proprioception from more my hips with my feet in the straps than I ever would in just my feet.
Right. So thinking about, again, I like to think about this as where is the neurological control coming from?
Yep.
That helps me the most. So if I think about having my feet in the straps, or from a personal training lens, my hands in barbells or dumbbells, not barbells, dumbbells, I'm closed chain in that I have some proprioception in my hands or my feet, but I'm in an unpredictable position, right? So in other words, I could move that somewhere else, and that control has to come more proximally. So I'd almost call those like semi-open chain.
Right.
right? Not fully open chain, because my hand isn't just free to do whatever it wants to do. It is getting some feedback from either the hand position or the foot position and the pressure on that. But it's open chain in the sense that the control has to come proximally. It has to come from the shoulder. If I'm talking about my arms, it has to come from the hips. If I'm talking about my legs.
Yep. Yep. And that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. To me, it always was more, and it goes to the neuro side of things as well, is the stability aspect. Where are you stabilizing from? If you're stabilizing proximally, and if the stability is predetermined, okay, the stability, when you're doing a squat, your stability is predetermined with the ground. Okay, because if I put myself on a BOSU, for instance, or an unstable apparatus in any way, that changes everything. But if I'm on a stable surface, I'm on the ground, my stability is defined.
Right.
You know, my stability is defined in that sense for my feet, for my balance to a certain degree. But it doesn't necessarily change the stability overall if I have, let's say, a 300-pound bar on my back. There's still a lot of stability that has to come to keep me from falling over, falling on my, you know, because that changes things as well.
So, yeah, right. So it's not just the forces coming from the ground in this case. So just breaking down closed chain, right? It's not just the forces coming from there. What if your hands are on the ground, or sorry, your feet are on the ground, you're standing, you're in let's say a wide leg with bent knees, and you're doing a rotation move, right? You're swinging a kettlebell, or you're swinging a viper. You're doing something which has a lot of rotation component to it, right? You've still got stability coming from the feet. Because those are, relatively closed chain, but they're having to respond then to what's happening in the rest of the body.
Right. So that's where this all gets murky.
Exactly.
Because you can't take, and in doing the research for this episode, I was looking at, okay, what defines open versus closed chain? And every organization from NSCA to ACE to NASM, they all have a slightly different variation of this. And, some talk about stability, some talk about forces, where forces are applied. And they're all different. And that's where this becomes murky. That's really where this becomes murky. I mean, I think oh, go ahead.
No, go on.
No, I was just saying, I had mentioned before we started that I was looking at the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy wrote an article about this. And it was an editorial. And basically he said, look, we can't take this at face value because there needs to be a lot more either definition or a lot more research done on what is truly open, what is truly closed.
Yeah.
Because
which I love.
I read one place that said, if it's a single joint that you're working, it's open chain. If it's a single joint, it's normally going to be an open chain. Whereas if it's a multi-joint compound movement, it's going to be more closed chained. And I was like, okay. But again, that's murky as well, because I can tell you a bunch of ones that aren't. But they were breaking it down as just pure levers. They were really looking at it from more of a physics, mechanical, kinesiologic point of view, saying a bicep curl is open chain. We're using a single joint. We're just doing the elbow joint. It's open chain movement. Whereas something like a pull-up or a row or something is much more compound. We have more to do. But then I'm thinking, but what about if you're doing it with a dumbbell? A bent over row. Wouldn't that be similar?
Yeah.
Now I'm using my entire shoulder, posterior shoulder girdle, everything plus my bicep.
Right.
So it changes. So, I mean, there's no clear-cut definition that sort of works.
And then the next piece of that is, and this is really where I think I've ended up, although we may get there over time, is this a useful concept?
Correct.
And honestly, I think as pure open and closed chain, for me, it is not a useful concept. It doesn't give me enough information. I mean, unless it's pure closed chain, like my feet are standing on the floor. I want to even break that open a little bit. So you said, what if I'm doing a squat standing on a BOSU? Or what if you're surfing or you're skiing? Your closed chain, I mean, you're on a stable surface
Hmm.
relatively. I mean, you know, skiing, you're on ski boots or whatever. At a Bosu, you have a dynamic surface underneath you. On a surfboard or whatever, you have the ground, the water underneath you,
Hmm.
right? So your feet are in contact with something, but what they're in contact with is not necessarily stable or predictable, depending,
Right.
right?
Right.
So then what is that, right?
Hmm.
Then you're also looking at that control generally being, yeah, it's a combination. Again, there's some control coming from the feet for sure in all those circumstances, but a lot of it's going to come more centrally because you're dealing with balance and changes of forces and how those vectors are moving through the body and, you know, core work, right? A
Yep.
lot of that is core work, for lack of a better word, because that's really what you're doing. You're having the whole body has to organize and stabilize and coordinate to manage those forces moving through it.
When you mentioned on a surfboard, when I was in Hawaii, probably 8 or 9 years ago, I was taking a walk. And for the first time, I saw something that blew my mind because when I go around Ala Moana Beach Park, there's always people doing yoga or Tai Chi or something like that. This was the first time I saw people out in the surf, mild surf, not big surf, but just on the waves, on paddle boards, doing yoga on paddle boards.
Yeah.
And I watched that, and I had to have stood there watching these people for 30 minutes and breaking down
Yeah.
their movement and thinking, oh my gosh, the amount of stability that it must take for the ground literally to be moving under you the entire time.
Yeah.
Your core, everything for you to remain stable, and not a single person landed in the water. Okay, I'm pretty good on a paddleboard. My butt would be in that water so fast. I could not, downward dog, downward Brian. There's no way I could have handled that. But it was amazing to watch. And again, that's the whole thing. The stability had to come from a lot more centralized in order for them to
Yeah.
stay afloat, even though they're
Yeah.
on these big boards, and not a
Yeah.
small surfboard. So, yeah, the amount of stability required to me is a lot more important. And that's how I've always sort of broken this down. That whole open chain, closed chain, I hate to say this, but I think it's one of those fancy terms that people like to use with clients because it makes them sound smart sometimes.
Yeah. I think so.
You know what I mean? Because, oh, we're going to do some closed chain
Yeah.
activities today. Ooh, sounds
Yeah.
fancy. Sounds really,
Right.
oh, you're going to squat. Okay.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So I agree.
Yeah. And I think, yeah.
I don't know where the value in determining open chain versus closed chain or, identifying is as important as challenging in multiple planes of motion.
Right. You know, in some ways, because you said you found this definition starting in the 50s,
Yeah, it was first started.
right? As far as you could tell. Okay.
I
Because
can
I
pull it up.
tried to find that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can. It was
You said that.
first. Hang on one second. I'm pulling it up now. All right. So it was first referred to in terms supposedly by Dr. Steindler uh, in the textbook of kinesiology published in 1956. It's no longer being published, but that was the first time that they did it. And the example that was given was an example of an open chain exercise would be a bench press or a leg press, which allows a force to be applied to move the load away from the body. In contrast, closed chain kinetic exercises are those in which the force is applied is not great enough to overcome the resistance. And I thought,
Whoa.
that is very different than how we necessarily
Very different.
determine that. And I thought,
Oh,
okay,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
little different. That's a little different. Like I said, I've been reading up on this because I was thinking, when we all took our courses way back when, we all heard about open and closed chain, but it was always in the most simplistic terms.
Yeah.
It,
Always.
it was never thought of. And this was based on he based his on another basic mechanical study that was done by someone who was more of a mechanical engineer. And it was
Mm.
about links. It was about how many links we're talking
Ah.
about. So again, doing more of a
Right.
single internal joint force, multi-link, whole body, all of that. So it was one of those, oh, okay, I think in our trying to simplify it for people, we've made it murky.
murky or, how do I say this? You know, I mean, always, I think always when we're trying to explain something to somebody, because you and I are both educators, we know how this works. You do your best, right?
Yep.
You kind of have to find the analogy that works for them. And I feel like this was fuzzy enough at the beginning that, and I also feel like fitness at that point in general, Western style fitness at that moment in time, in the 50s and 60s, was fairly simple. It was fairly straightforward: squats and lunges, and barbells and dumbbells, and there wasn't as much emphasis at that point, certainly on core, on multiplanar motion. Like all of
Function.
that is
Yeah.
function. Like all that, I think is really relatively new in my. I've been in the world for about 30 plus years, and boy, 30 years ago,
Never spoke
nobody
about
I
these.
knew who was a personal trainer was talking about that kind of stuff.
No.
So that's really changed radically, and I think for the better, because I think we're understanding movement in a more complex way. And I think that's really where open chain and closed chain just breaks down. Although the case I'd make for it is twofold. One is really looking at is what is the influence of your hand or your foot position. So that's for me how I take it. One other thought that I had, because closed chain, I'm not going by the definition you had, but more by the modern definition of like what about if you're doing core work, like you're doing a curl, supine on the floor, right? Is your back creating the closed chain?
Like a crunch.
Like a crunch. If you're doing a crunch, your basic abdominal curl, right? Like is the back then creating that closed chain?
Right.
Because it's creating the stability and the proprioception and the support that then the body is working off of.
Absolutely. And in that sense, you would think, yes, it would become a closed chain exercise. But as soon as your upper body leaves the ground, if you turn it into more of a sit-up, does that change that? Because the amount of contact surface area now changes.
Right. I mean, right. Exactly. It's a question. I don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. Years ago, when I first got into this, I read a book. I have no idea. I have gone back to try and find this book. Okay. Can't find it anywhere. But it talked about what they called NMA. Okay, neuromuscular activation. It was brought up by a bunch of bodybuilders and things like that. And they broke things down by how much stability the exercise has inherently. So a 1 to 7. A 1 would be something like a machine press, where everything, path of motion, everything is dictated by that machine. Basically, you're just pushing against it. So you have no stability whatsoever required of you. It's just pure mechanical force, your muscle against that machine. And the higher up you go, like a row, like a seated row where you're sitting upright, but your butt's still connected to a seat, so only part of your body is being stable, and you've got a cable in front of you and you're rowing it back, so you've got some stability from the cable and the weight. That would be like a 4 to a 5.
Okay.
And then something like a 7 would be like a squat or like a push-up, where there's a lot more of your mind that is involved, because there's also a little bit more of a fear factor, because you probably are handling more weight. If you're doing a pull-up, you could fall. There's different things that make it more neurologically stimulating to the body, is how they were basically putting it. One didn't have a whole lot of stimulation, not a lot of stability. The other had a lot more stability and a lot more neural needed in order to accomplish the exercise. And their thought was, the higher up you go, the more strength gains you're going to make, the more you're going to get out of it. The lower you go, the less strength gains you're going to make. And you and I could argue both sides of this equation till the cows come home.
Absolutely.
But when I'm first starting out, it sort of made sense to me that I was like, okay, doing exercises that challenge stability more and that make the body work harder made sense.
Yeah.
Where, okay, instead of putting you in a machine row, I would put you in a seated row, because now I have to stabilize the rest of the body. Okay, that's more challenging. That becomes more functional. So just in my mind, as a beginner trainer, we're talking 30 years ago, it made sense, this whole philosophy. And I've still kept a little bit of that sort of in the back of my brain sort of thing. Again, I've looked, I can't find any literature that actually proves any of this stuff. I'm sure it's conjecture on somebody's part, and they wrote a book, I read it and believed it as gospel for a few years, like everybody does occasionally. And, you move away from it. But I think the theory sort of made sense. And that's sort of where I always thought of things going, rather than an open chain versus closed chain, was stability-wise. What requires more muscle work, and usually it's, things are going to be more challenging in more closed chain environment, traditional closed chain environment.
And, well, you're also talking about complexity, though, right? So, is it kind of a,
Absolutely.
again, in a machine bench press where your arms are in a position, or like a bicep curl, your arms are over a bar and you just have a thing and you just pull it in, right? And everything else is set. You can kind of sit on the bar. You can lean your back against whatever the support is.
Yep.
Your arms have a support, and you're just using basically essentially one joint more or less muscle, or one joint more or less exercise. So that complexity versus, a standing row with cables.
Yep.
Right? Like in a squat, standing row with cables, or alternating arm standing row with cables, or standing bicep curl cables. So both of those, again, are more complex.
Yep.
And one thing I'd say, though, is like, if you think about strength gains, and some of this is coming from the Pilates lens, strength, just pure strength gains. One of the challenges with Pilates is it's hard to really push a lot of the strength element of it, because everything is sort of whole body.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to stabilize the torso enough, for example, doing arms with the straps, to manage those forces coming through it.
Mm-hmm.
So it creates a lot of good integration of the body parts, because they have to work together in many of the exercises. But if I was trying to get just plain old strength, I would want to be in an environment where I was a little bit more stabilized, let's say a supine bench press, and just being able to do that bench press in a relatively stabilized way with the rest of my body, because I could take a lot more weight there than I ever could in the Pilates environment.
I'm actually going through that argument that you're having right now with myself when I take my son to the gym with me. Because I immediately started with dumbbells for bench press. Okay.
Yeah.
We did push-ups first, trying to stabilize, planks, all of that stuff, because I wanted him to learn stability through the whole body. But then eventually we're going to do dumbbell bench press, because I wanted him to learn stability through the shoulders. But I also realized that there was going to be a limitation that he was probably going to come up against, and there was going to be a weight that was going to be, okay, we're going to be at this weight for a while. Well, because of not only that, but because dumbbells don't work for my shoulders. I've had multiple surgeries. The hammer strength incline and flat bench press work really well for me. So I started doing that, and he wanted to do it with me, so no problem. His strength gains have gone through the roof. He is pushing so much more weight on that, because it is a more fixed path of motion. He's able to just push, just get that muscular push. And so I was like, oh, okay, there's a reason that both work. There's a reason you kind of can do both of them. For me, I was just trying to keep the strength I have, knowing that I'm fairly stable and I do other things that, provide my stability. I just wanted to get, keep strong in this exercise that I can't do other ways. But for him, who's just starting out at 15 years old, he's almost doing, 3/4 of my weight. And I'm thinking, dang. But on a dumbbell press, he was doing a lot less, just because he needed to do all the other stuff, all the other stability.
Yes.
So again, I'm having this argument in my own head going, which is going to be better for him in the long run? So we do both. I alternate, but it's kind of like, interesting. It's an interesting argument that I was having, whether to take that totally closed chain sort of positioning of the machine versus more of an open chain where he had to have that stability.
They're both valuable, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think functionally, we don't generally have that kind of external stability for a lot of our moves functionally. I'm thinking of taking laundry out of the washing machine, right? I don't have anything externally stabilizing me. I lean over and I'm in a funny position and my knees are bent, and I'm lifting up, and it's just awkward, right?
Yep.
Um, so, and it's a little bit like we talked about some last time with where Pilates and personal training meet. And I was thinking about this today as I was writing up a thing for that, um, because you're looking for strength in some sort of circumstances. You're looking for stability in other circumstances, and ultimately, you're trying to get strength and stability to match,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that you could then push something heavy or pull something towards you while you're standing, while you're lifting, while you're in some other environment,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's kind of ideally where you're going for.
Absolutely.
But I think getting the strength gains in that isolated environment, and this is a question for you, creates a little more benefit when you're in the unstable environment,
It does. And I've seen
right? So there's
that
a
overlap.
synergy there. Yeah.
100%. I've seen the overlap because when we go back to dumbbells, whereas, he was at 25 pounds for 12 reps and was stable, but couldn't do any more, now he can do 35 pounds without a problem
Yeah.
because the
Right.
larger muscles are now helping to stabilize the stabilizers, but
Yep.
he still needs the stabilizers. So it's kind of like watching, thinking, wow, okay, which is why, okay, look at how many, athletes will use a bench press and they can do 400 pounds, 500
Yeah.
pounds. Are they going
Yep.
to do 200-pound dumbbells? No,
No.
they're not. Shoulder joint cannot stabilize that very easily. I mean,
Right.
I've
Right.
never seen it, so I can't say it can't be done, but I've never seen it.
Yep.
But it can be done in a different environment. So,
Yep.
it comes down to what are the benefits and where are we going to get these benefits from when we're looking at whatever the goal is for our client in front of us.
And going back to again, I'm taking this slightly different view of closed chain, open chain. So if you think about doing a barbell bench press,
Mm-hmm.
right? Barbell bench press. You're stabilized. You're lying down. You've got the bar, which is going to stabilize to some extent where your hand position is, where your shoulder position is, and it's you pretty much go in one direction. It's not like a machine, so it's
Mm-hmm.
not quite as organized as that environment, but it's more organized than dumbbells.
Yes.
Right. So I'd almost call that like semi-closed chain
Yep.
and barbell semi-open chain. Because again, there's more stability. I'm thinking of more stability with the closed chain and less stability as you get more and more open chain.
Yep.
And open chain also, again, I'm throwing this out there, but is again working for more function,
Mm-hmm.
for less predictability, for an environment where you're not so stabilized, where you've got to do a lot more intrinsic stabilization of the core or the shoulders or the hips or whatever you're doing to get the job done.
And that's what the studies have been showing. I was looking at a bunch of different studies where they took a look at open chain versus closed chain. And these are the studies that didn't deal with the ACL, but they did balance. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When they looked at balance, closed chain and open chain both helped significantly static balance, standing on one foot basically.
Yeah.
But closed chain dramatically helped dynamic balance, whereas open chain didn't.
Yes. Yes.
And
Exactly.
that was one of those things I was like, aha, okay. And for function, closed chain has seen a much higher correlation. Again, the word correlation,
Mm-hmm.
much higher. Open chain, not that much correlation with functional activities.
Yes.
Whereas
Exactly.
closed chain has a lot of correlation, with gains in functional activities.
And that's been my experience in many ways in the Pilates environment. It's like I think about the Pilates environment, which is semi-closed chain sometimes, semi-open
Mm-hmm.
chain sometimes, if we can use those languages, sometimes more really closed chain. It varies, but a lot of it is semi. A lot of it is
Mm-hmm.
not fully closed chain.
Yep.
And I think about my clients who went from doing a lot of Pilates work to doing the Coraline work.
Mm-hmm.
Coraline, for those of you who don't know, is an upright device that has two carts in parallel tracks that can run independently and have resistance from the front or the back and a ladder in front that you can hold on to, basically. And what I saw was in my clients who had been doing Pilates, so a lot of semi-open chain and semi-closed chain, if you will, and a variety of different things, stood up and went to the Coraline and were basically in a relatively functional, upright, pretty closed chain position. A lot of times your feet are on the carts and your hands are on the ladder. Now the carts are mobile, so there's a little unpredictability there, but you're getting a lot of strong feedback. Like the gains they made in terms of balance were unbelievable.
Yep.
So fast.
Yep.
to put them in an environment that was a closed chain environment where they were really working upright, where they actually were using a lot of the stabilizers they would use in a real dynamic balance situation. And I've had clients who, like, literally, it didn't necessarily last, but after just a 10 or 15-minute session on the core line, we do their balance tests, again, standing on one leg or different things, and it was like 100% better.
Yep. Yep. And I've noticed that too. And I think part of it is, like you said, just changing the body's position. Because if you're doing all your exercises in one position, whether it be lying down, mat, whether it be all seated, whether it be all standing, you get stronger at what you do regularly.
Yes.
So when you're in a more dynamic, stable environment where you're training your body, like we've talked about in the past, we talked about training the hip and the knee in 3 dimensions, working in much more of a 3-dimensional way, so it's much more functional, where the forces are coming from different angles, where we're rotating through our hips, through the joints that need to be rotating. You know, we had talked about, you know, stability versus mobility and looking at that whole kinetic chain at what's mobile, what's stable, and trying to figure out, okay, where do we need the stability?
Mm-hmm.
And when you do those exercises regularly, you begin to build stability in the hip joint, in the ankle joint, where we require that because those are fairly mobile joints, and we need to keep those stable in order to have good functioning hips and ankles.
Yeah.
You know?
But again, so one other thing that I just wanted to bring up, we've gone way around.
I know
we've gone all the way around the bend. We've done that, but that's how it goes. So again, open close chain started us off on this path, but really it's looking at complexity of movement.
Mm-hmm.
It's looking at where is the control coming from.
Yep.
It's looking at how different environments create different kinds of really neuromuscular control or neuromyofascial control. I want to talk about that. And I think the beautiful thing here is that is where the dialogue in movement has come to.
Yep.
Right, that we're no longer just like defining things so narrowly as I feel like they were with open and closed chain, but we're really looking at what is this doing at an organismic level, right? What's the whole organism doing? How is it responding to the environment that it's in, to where the proprioception's coming in through the hands or through the shoulders or through the feet or through the knees or through the hips, wherever it's coming from.
Yep.
And what does that do to creating functional movement patterns, functional complex movement patterns that are effective?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like the thought of semi. I've always used the word partial when it comes to open and closed chain.
Yep.
And semi, same thing. Because again, when I've talked to students and whatnot about things like a bench press, it's like, look, you still need to stabilize. It's considered closed chain, but it's open chain as well. So I've always said it's partial. It's partially closed chain.
Right. Right.
So I like the word semi. It's semi-closed chain, semi-open chain. I'd like to introduce the concept that we don't think of open and closed chain as black and white, but as a spectrum.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And that's what's kind of like closed chain, semi-closed chain, semi-open chain, fully open chain, like that's, and again, there's a lot of gradations between and amongst all of those.
Absolutely.
And it's not four buckets, it's 64 buckets that just have a little more closed, a little more open, a little more contact, a little less contact, wherever you're going, a little more complexity, a little more stability.
Yeah, because nothing is completely, black and white unless you are completely locked into a machine where everything is dictated for you, like one of the old Cybex kinematic, knee extension machines where you are locked in every way, shape, and form, and the only thing that can move is extension and flexion.
Right.
Okay.
You got one thing happening.
That's it. Exactly. But even the hammer strength machine I was telling you about, where my elbows are, can move. I'm pushing on a fixed object, but I can drive my elbows down close to my chest and change the exercise. I can take them away and do more abduction and change the exercise. So again, that changes it a little bit from being, completely closed chain to partially, everything changes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's just an important thing to think about and that's really what we're bringing up here is really looking at movement as this complex system. Like maybe you're doing something simple. You're doing just a bicep curl in whatever environment you're in, right? Relatively, you have to stabilize the shoulder, whatever position that arm is in. You're going to stabilize the shoulder, whatever you're doing with your forearm, whether it's pronated or supinated or neutral, right? And then you're basically using one joint. Great, that's fantastic. But let's say you're going to go down, pick up pick up your child, your screaming 2-year-old is what I always picture, because I've got a few nieces and nephews of that age, right? You're leaning down, you're picking them up. It's the same thing, but look at all the other pieces that are part of that. How
Oh
much
my
more
gosh.
stability is required, right? Right. It's still a bicep curl. At least part of it is, but there's hip flexion, there's knee flexion, there's the squat, there's, all those bits.
And my dumbbells never wiggle, so that's another thing.
No, and if they do wiggle, it's because you moved them.
Exactly.
Right. It's not because they're just moving on their own, which they will do in
Exactly.
unpredictable and extreme ways. Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. So let's break down a couple of exercises then and try and define that spectrum a little bit.
All right.
Because again, I agree. Are like 64 boxes. Nothing's going to be completely one end or the other. But just so those people who are listening can have sort of an understanding of, oh, okay, I see what they mean by, partially or semi-closed chain versus semi-open chain. So I think we're in agreement that a closed chain would be something like a squat.
Yep.
A push-up, whether on the wall, on the ground, whatever, where your hand is that the surface that you're touching provides the majority of the stabilization that you're going to be working with.
And the feedback.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, and the proprioceptive feedback.
Right.
Yep.
You're getting it mostly from whatever you're in contact with. Provided it's whatever you're in contact with is in contact with something stable as well. That the whole unit is stable. Right? So what exercise would you consider then to be partially closed chain?
I'm going in about 3 different directions. So I'm going to give at least 2 examples, maybe 3. So one example would be footwork on the reformer, right, in the Pilates environment. Because yes, your foot, you're relatively blocked in, right? Your shoulders are against the shoulder rest, your feet are up against the foot bar. But you don't have full stability of the foot because your weight's on the heel or it's on the ball of the foot or wherever it is, right? It's only on part of the foot. And so you've got those options in terms of ankle movement.
Yes.
Or you have a lot more options in terms of where your feet go, where your ankles go, specifically ankles, knees, and hips go, than you do when your feet are flat on the floor or even flat on a standing platform or a jump board.
And we see that all the time on the reformer when we have a client, you tell them, okay, I want your feet parallel, and after the 3rd repetition, it's at 10 and 2. It can still move.
10 and 2. Right. Or you have them do a heel lift and they've completely rolled out onto their onto their 5th finger, right? Their 5th toe.
Right. So you're not getting as much stability as, let's say, a leg press, or even on a reformer where you have the jump board where the foot is completely flat and you have the entire proprioceptive, feedback from all 5 toes and, the sole of your foot.
Exactly. So another example for me would be something where both feet are flat on a surface, but that surface is not stable.
Okay.
So it could be a BOSU. It could be, again, a surfboard, skiing, any of those kind of things where the feet are flat and you've got that full proprioceptive feedback, but the surface they're on is not predictable or not stable. Right? So it's closed chain in that sense, but a whole lot more is required. So that's also, I think of that as sort of a semi-closed chain because there's more that has to happen. The body has to deal with something more complex.
You're stabilizing closer to, much more proximally than distally.
You have to.
You have to.
Right.
You have to.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. No, I like that because, especially now, we sort of joke that the F word in, fitness for the longest time has been function, because everything for a while was functional. And eventually functional became, let's stand on a BOSU on one leg, juggle this ball and lift this other weight over our head and then reach our other foot behind us. It was ridiculous stuff rather than what is truly functional. Getting up off the toilet, that's functional for some people. So, there's 2 different ways you can look at function, in that sense. So we see a lot of people using unstable apparatus. So we can now sort of clearly define that as being a semi-closed chain position because their feet are getting proprioceptive from whatever device they're on, but the device is moving and requires more stability in order to achieve said exercise.
And not fall over.
And not fall down.
right?
Rule number one,
Which is-
don't fall down.
which also is a stimulation for the nervous system, right?
Yes.
The nervous system does not want to fall down fundamentally. You put
Yep.
something on an unstable surface and the whole system lights up and goes, do not fall down. That's my job here, is to stay up, on the BOSU or on the surfboard or skiing, whatever. Like
Yep.
that's the thing. The whole body organizes around that. It doesn't have to do that if you're standing on the floor.
So if I were to do...
It doesn't say, oh my God, I'm going to fall over.
So I'm going to take this and put it into an upper body type of exercise. Okay.
Great.
On the Coraline or on a slide board, if I put my hands on 2 towels on a slide board, so I can do abduction and adduction and I have some instability. And on the Coraline, the carts basically only move forward and backwards. They're locked in a
Right. And a track.
Track, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So they're locked in a track, and you can put them on the same track, and you can do abduction and adduction. So if I wanted to do a push-up where my hands spread wide and as my chest goes to the ground, and then as I push up, my hands can come together, basically turning a fly and a push-up into the same exercise. That would be more of a semi-closed chain environment.
Yeah.
Because I'm still in contact with something. My entire hand is still on the ground or on the cart. So I have all that proprioception, but I still have some instability because they're going out and in.
Right.
So I still have to stabilize for my shoulder joint, for my spine, and all of that sort of thing as well. Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. So that kind of that semi-closed chain. So your feet or your hands are in contact.
Yep.
But what they're in contact with is not necessarily completely predictable.
Right, right. And you could do the same thing on, like I say, a slide board with your hands on towels or the booties, where you take it wide, or glider discs or whatever you want. You could do the similar thing.
Yep. All those things, right? Even if I'm standing with both my feet on a glider disc and I'm going like a little forward and back kind of motion, or an in and out kind of motion, right? Again, semi-closed chain, I would call those.
Okay, I like that. And I agree with that definition. Because it is more close chain. You are getting that proprioception from the contact, but the contact is unstable.
Right.
With the ground. Okay. So how would you now define semi-open chain?
So semi-open chain, again, in Pilates, I specifically think about that in something like hands in the straps or feet in the straps.
I agree.
Where similarly, I've got some contact point, right? And I'm also using this kind of foot proprioception thing, which is why the foot bar I think of as semi-closed chain. It's more closed chain, I would argue, than being on a BOSU, right? I think you could sort of make a gradation there. Feet in the straps, right? You've got that mobility of the straps. And you also have where the strap sits on the foot creates a certain kind of proprioception that you don't get when the whole foot is on the floor. So the proprioception is a little bit different, and the environment is, again, more mobile, a little more mobile. But in any case, no matter what you're doing, you really are still getting an awful lot of control proximally. Right? It's really your hips that are controlling the action, those legs, not the feet so much, and what the feet are doing. So I think of that as semi-open chain, or to use your example of the barbell bench press, right, or the barbell chest press, the dumbbell chest press, right, where again you've got a chest press, but you've got that mobility. Like you can choose how you push those dumbbells forward.
Right.
You can choose them. You can have a lot of options there, and you've got to choose which option. You've got to stabilize the shoulder against whatever that option is that you choose.
Right. I almost would. The only thing I would argue with that, and I agree completely with the feet in straps or hands in straps. And I was even looking at tubes for like a pressing exercise or something like that, because
or cables.
Cables. Cables and tubes, because you're not dealing with a gravitational force. Gravity is always going to work one direction. Whereas a tube, if I'm standing perfectly, away from it, it's coming at one direction. If I turn 10 degrees, it's going to change. If I turn another 10 degrees, it's going to change. So that changes the amount of stability required within my core, my shoulder, everything that's pressing, if I'm doing a simple pressing movement. Whereas in a dumbbell press, I still think of that as being a lot more of an open chain, because even though I have contact with a dumbbell, my arms can go anywhere they want. And the force of the dumbbell against gravity is going to pull them in all those different directions.
So it's almost like degrees of freedom.
Yes, yes.
Right? Because if you've got cables, you're right. If I'm doing a chest press with cables, standing chest press with cables, it's telling me a lot about what my possibilities are in terms of where my hands can go.
Yes.
I mean, I got more options than I do if I'm on a barbell or I'm in a machine,
Yep.
right? But I'm still like, most people are going to do one path, choose a path within a narrow limit.
Right.
Whereas if I've got two dumbbells and I'm doing the same thing, that path has way more options.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
So that's that gradation on that, that open chain or closed chain. Like I'm going to be more open chain if I've got more options in terms of movement potential from that exercise, from that position.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I like that because, and then thinking about a barbell bench press, for instance, that would be
more stable.
That's a lot more stable. So that would almost, I mean, if we wanted to add another one in there, that almost would be between semi-open and semi-closed chain because you are locked in one direction. You can't go laterally,
Right.
so you do get a lot of stability just from the bar itself, but it's still open chain because you still have to stabilize or else it's going to fall. It's going to fall on you. It's going to go over your head. It's going to go to your waist. So you still have to stabilize in some way, shape, or form. So it's a little bit more open, but
yes,
it's very much semi. So would you put that in?
Right. And if you compare it to doing the same thing with a dumbbell, it's more closed chain.
Correct.
Right. So it's just like where it is relative to other exercises that are similar.
So, and then
I'm doing a cable. Yeah.
Yes.
Go on.
No, that makes sense. I was just thinking, so a truly open chain would be something like a dumbbell press or like a dumbbell curl where you're truly out in space. And in Pilates land, all of the stuff that we do side lying, all the mat stuff, side lying leg raises, clamshell, all the things that you're not necessarily in contact where the leg is up in space. That's all open chain.
That's all open chain.
Because nothing is in contact with that. So that is truly an open chain environment because nothing's in contact.
Right. Right. And the same thing with, going into a dance environment, a more aesthetic environment, like all the arm work you do in ballet.
Right.
Right. It's just fully open chain.
Right.
And there's no resistance. Now, if I did that with, an ankle weight or a wrist weight or something, it's still fully open chain.
Yep.
Right. There's no proprioception coming from my hands. All of the work has to happen proximally.
Right. So,
and that is fully open chain.
Right. So a lateral raise, an overhead press, anything like that, or even, a rotating overhead press with a light dumbbell. I mean, because our hand is open throughout space, we have to control it completely. That's truly open chain for that part of it. And we're not adding in complexity of lower and upper body here because that's going to take this in a whole nother direction.
Right.
That's another 2-hour conversation.
That complicates the whole story.
Yeah. So we're just limiting it to that one area. So shoulder girdle. No, I like those definitions. I like those definitions because it clarifies things a little bit.
I think it makes things more complex in a way, but I think it makes things more real and helps you understand, like, again, is this more about like, where does the stability have to come from?
Yep.
Where does the mobility have to come from? How much stability is required for that activity? Because again, I think you and I talk a lot more about mobility and stability in an exercise and where we are in the complexities of that spectrum than we do on the open closed chain spectrum. But I think adding that open closed chain spectrum in just gives you some tools and some ways to think about your environment and what you're trying to do, how you're trying to work with that environment.
I agree. The more open chain you are, you're going to absolutely need a lot more proximal stability. And the more closed chain you are, you're going to get that distal stability, but you can probably do a lot greater load because you don't have to worry about stabilizing as much.
Exactly. You're externally stabilized by the floor or the bench or whatever it is you're on.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Do you see there being, I was going to say, are there any benefits, but we just covered that. The benefits are you add more complexity, you add more open chain, you add more stabilization. You're getting a little bit more into, real life moments where you have to bend over, pick something up, or reach and pull and do all of these kind of things, which we do constantly on a daily basis. I joke with people that, in what we do, it's kind of like, okay, pick up heavy weight, put down again. Because,
Right.
that's what a lot of people think weightlifting is. It's just, doing a deadlift.
Yeah.
And a deadlift will make you stronger for activities of daily life because you're going to have to pick something up. You're going to have to do it. But at the same time, you may want to do it in a different stance or do this or do that because, in a different way because you want to train the body to be able to get something out of the trunk of a car or to, like you said, pick up a 2-year-old who's wiggly, who doesn't want to be, suddenly you pick him up and he goes from being 20 pounds to 40 pounds. And how does that happen? That's
Uh-huh.
not physics,
Oh,
but it becomes dead weight. Those things, require a lot more stability and it changes the exercise completely. So the more
yeah.
complexity, the more stabilization we require probably is going to be closer to the open chain end versus the closed.
Yeah. And I think to your point, I loved the example you gave of you and your son. Because again, the stability provides, you can get more strength, just pure strength for a particular movement with that stability, right? You can push a lot harder weight when everything is stabilized externally or by a machine, which is helpful, right? That's a way to get strength you can't always get in a more open environment.
Yep.
But again, most functional activities are complex.
Yep.
You're bending down, you're picking up, you've got your hips, your knees, your ankles, your upper body, everything's working together. And I think working with a little more open chain, you have to do more integration.
Yes.
Right? Integration and complexity. The things are working together and they have to harmonize and be able to coordinate appropriately to manage whatever load or whatever position they're going into.
Yeah. So benefits are both. And I think both
Yeah.
need to be or should be addressed in
Yep.
your fitness environment, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Don't only train for function where you're having them do these crazy things that are super high complexity because, you may not build that much strength. You
Yeah.
should do other things that do involve greater strength building that may be more closed chain,
Yeah.
as well as the
Yeah.
complexity and more open chain and play along that
Yep.
spectrum.
It's the fun part about movement, right?
Yes. Yes,
This is
exactly.
this is this is why we still find it fascinating after 30 years. That there's just every body, every movement, everything you play with has all these variables, which are just wonderful to play with and really fun. And hopefully, all we've done here is provide you with some other ways to think about it, right?
Yes.
Some new perspectives on how to analyze movement, how to analyze exercises, how to think about what your clients might need for particular performance purposes or functional purposes.
And
Yeah,
always,
this is,
yeah, something else just I reiterate this with my staff all the time and even with myself I remind myself. It's all got to be goal oriented.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
not
absolutely.
just telling them to exercise to exercise. There should be a reason for it.
Yep.
So why are you doing this exercise for them? Why are they participating in this? Is it something that's going to help them either build strength, build function, build, for activities of daily life, whatever it is, for sports, adventure, whatever, or resiliency? Make sure it's toward their goal and not just because you're bored and you want to give them a new exercise, which I see that a
Which
lot.
does happen. We all know that happens,
We know it
guys. We
happens.
recognize that tendency. But right, what is the purpose? Why am I giving this to you now? What are the skills you need to develop that are going to help your life?
Yeah. So by introducing this concept, hopefully we've opened up that can of worms a little bit in your brain. And again, this is what Nora and I do. We get on a call or a Zoom and we start talking and we pull these questions out there like, or I'll mention something and she'll say, well, I've been thinking about that and da 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 da. And it opens up a whole earworm for me. And the next 2 weeks, I'm thinking about it. And then I come back and we go back and forth. So that's what we're sharing with you. We're hoping that it just opens your brain up a little bit and that, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or maybe I will try and do a little bit, not change the way I'm training someone, but maybe modify something to make it a little bit more this way or a little bit more that way.
Yep. And you'll discover that you don't get answers from us. You get a lot of questions,
Yes.
a lot of things to think about. Occasionally you get an answer, but most you'll get a lot of like, well, here's some things to contemplate.
Exactly. And that's what this is all about. We're not here with the answers because, as you know, Nora, we are students of the game. We are
Absolutely.
we are scholars, we are students, we're constantly learning, and we are teachers. And I heard a great quote just last night about being a teacher is that we don't know everything, and
Right.
we also get it wrong sometimes. We're
Yep.
still human, and we're still learning. So keep that in mind. We're all learning, and we want you to question. And if you have any questions, please ask us. Ask us. You can reach us at our socials, Moving Combos on Twitter and on Instagram, movingcombos@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, you want to ask us anything, or have us talk about a specific topic, we're open to it. We're definitely open to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we covered a lot of things today.
Whew, went a lot of directions.
We did. We
That was
did.
great.
All right.
Appreciate that.
Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.